Today's video will discuss chapter 7.7, simple and compound interest. And so we're going to focus on this formula. It's one we're going to kind of keep referring back to, so you may want to think about putting this in your notes. I equals P R T. So remember, this is you're multiplying P times R times T. I is the interest. P is the principal, so that's the amount that you are borrowing or the amount that you're investing. Annual rate is a percentage that is written in decimal form, and then the time is in years. So keep in mind that means that if you're talking about 6 months, that would be 0.5 years as opposed to 6, right? Because if you put a 6 year, it's going to mean 6 years. If you mean 6 months, you have to call that half of a year. And then remember, interest is basically, as you borrow money, you end up paying back more than you borrowed. So in order to get the money, you have to agree to pay back more than you borrowed, but then you can have the money immediately as opposed to not being able to buy whatever it is you buy. So a lot of times people use interest when you're making big purchases, cars, houses, things like that. All right, so I'm going to keep this formula off to the side because we're going to refer back to it. We're going to start with simple interest, and then obviously, as you saw from the title of the chapter, we're going to eventually talk about compound interest. So simple interest, we're just going to use the formula. We want to find the interest if we borrow or invest $1,000 at 4.5% for 3 years. So I'm going to use I equals PRT. I'm trying to find the interest, so that's my unknown. This is my principal, so that's 1,000, times my annual interest rate, which is 4.5. Now remember, I have to write this in decimal form, so that's 0.045. Right, not 0.45, because 0.45 would be 45%. And then the number of years, and it's 3 years. So now I'm going to multiply these three numbers together, and I get interest equals $135. So in other words, if this were a loan, so if I were borrowing $1,000 at 4.5% for 3 years, at the end of those 3 years, I will owe $135 in interest. So in the end, I would pay back $1,135. But I will get the $1,000 immediately as opposed to not having it, being able to buy. So keep in mind, I'm using this formula. All right, now what we're going to do is talk about compound interest. Right, so simple interest, you're essentially plugging in numbers. Keep in mind, sometimes they may give you three of the numbers, and it may not necessarily be you're always trying to solve for interest. So sometimes maybe they'll give you the interest, the rate, and the time, and they want you to find the principal. Right, you would just have to kind of move things around. But now we're going to talk about compound interest. So compound interest means we're going to use this formula, but we're actually going to end up using it twice. So typically, a compound interest problem might be written like this. I'm, let's say, investing $600 at 8.75% compounded annually for 2 years. So what I'm going to have to do is now, because it's 2 years, when you do compound interest, I'm going to come back to this one in just a second. When you do compound interest, this is always a 1. So I have to do it 1 year at a time. That's what I'm compounding it, putting them on top of each other. Right, so each year I'm just doing 1. So compound interest is really I equals P times R, and then we just have to do this as many times as we can. So, or as we need to. So this is for 2 years, so I'm going to end up doing this twice. So this is 600, so interest equals $600 times, remember I have to write this as a decimal. It's a very small 0.0875. Remember that we're talking about 1 year. So now I go 600 times 0.0875, and I get $52.50. Right? So now this is what my calculator would show. Remember, since we're talking about money, I'm going to add this extra 0. But so here's the trick to a problem like this. That means at the end of the year, because I invested this money and I made $52.50, the next year I won't be starting with $600 as my principal. My principal will now be the $600 plus the $52.50 that I made. So, I'm going to pull up a new slide. Remember, I'm now using this formula again. The biggest thing here is that my P has changed, right? So now I'm doing interest equals, but my principal is no longer 600. My principal is now 600 plus 52.50. So now my principal is $652.50, but the interest rate is still the same, 0.0875. Sorry, I'm running out of space. And so now I got to do the 652.50 times 0.0875, and I end up, I'm going to write out this long number that I get because I want you to see how this works. On the calculator, I'm going to get 57.09375. Now the problem is, remember, this is dollars. And so dollars never or rarely looks like this. So what we need to do is round to the cent, nearest cent. So I know that the 0.9 are my cents, which means that it's this number here that's going to tell me what I should do with this 9. And since this number is less than 5, I'm going to leave this alone. So my interest is $57.09. But remember, now I need to add that to what I had at the start of the year, which was $652.50. And so when I add that and the $57.09, I end up with a total of $709.59. So $600 invested at 8.75%, compounded annually for 2 years, will give me, at the end of those 2 years, I will have gone from $600 to $709.59. Okay, so again, we are going to be using this formula. The biggest difference between simple and compound interest is that the compound interest is just going to end up being more steps. It's not necessarily more difficult. A lot of people feel like it's more difficult. It's not necessarily more difficult. It's just going to be, a longer problem. To get to the answer will take a little bit more time. That's all we got for you on simple and compound interest. Thanks very much for watching the video. Don't forget to do the problems on the bottom of the page, and I'll see you in class.